Aquinas, I don't know if you've seen this quote. It's in the Summa. I can bring it up if you want, because I'm just going to paraphrase it.
Yeah.
Basically, he talks about the difference between the Greeks and the Latin fathers, which he considers himself a part of.
Yeah.
And he says that they use the word cause, but he doesn't seem to like that term. He prefers the word principle. But because he said that the term cause implies dependency. And he seems to have a problem with that. So I'm wondering if you've read that at all and what your understanding of his model on eternal generation is, because I find it difficult to understand if it's not causation and it's not grounding or dependency, what does principle mean? Like, how is that cashed out in the metaphysics of it?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm honest, I don't have a lot of knowledge on Aquinas' model of the Trinity.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Aquinas for quite a few things, but there are a few things that I just haven't seen the need to sort of utilize his work on it.
Yeah.
And I think sort of you get all you need on the Trinity from the patristic fathers.
Yeah.
And I don't think, for me personally, Aquinas adds much to them, if anything, really. So I don't know specifically what he's meaning by that, and I don't see what the problem will be with the Son or the Spirit being dependent upon the Father. I know he affirms some form of the monarchy of the Father, in that he will affirm that the Father is a sole principle of divinity. But again, I don't think he would. Hey, long time.
Good to see you, sir.
Oh, yeah, it's been too long. Catch them all. I don't see the problem with dependence, or there being a dependence relation between them. So I'm probably not the best guy on Thomas and the Trinity. But yeah, just something though, in my most recent stuff. So more like the existence of God stuff. I am sort of in the middle of taking grounding to be analogous to causation.
To causation, yeah.
Yeah, but it also being a form of causation. So there's sort of a divide in the grounding sort of community between Alistair Wilson, so like a professor at Birmingham, and Jonathan Schaffer, who's like the main guy on the issue. Where Schaffer's taking grounding to be analogous, and Wilson takes it to be identical to a form of causation. So he calls it metaphysical causation. So grounding is a type of causation. I'm sort of in the middle of that, and in my most recent work, I actually side more with Wilson, and I take grounding to be a type of causation. So he would say that you've got to divide causation into two types, or two tokens within the category. So you have nomological causation, and you have metaphysical causation. Nomological causation is normal causation. It's diachronic, temporal sequence. But metaphysical causation is a synchronic relation, as grounding is normally understood to be. And he thinks that because there is the similarity between grounding and causation is so much that it's better just to identify grounding as a type of causation. I've sort of sided with him more. And so my most recent stuff on like the existence of God,
Just taking a picture.
Okay. I sort of identify as a type of a type of causation. But yeah, just sorry, with the Aquinas stuff, I'm just not the guy.
Can I just read you a quote from him? Because so you get what I'm saying. So this is in the Summa, Part 1, Question 33. He says no problem. So he says, the word principle signifies only that whence another proceeds. Since anything whence something proceeds in any way, we call it principle. And conversely, as the Father then is the one whence another proceeds, it follows that the Father is a principle. The Greeks use the word cause and principle indifferently when speaking of God, whereas the Latin doctors do not use the word cause, but only principle. The reason is because principle is a wider term than cause, as cause is more common than element or principle. For the first term of a thing, as also the first part, is called the principle but not the cause. And then he goes on further to say, now the wider a term is, the more suitable it is to use as regards to God. because the more special terms are, the more they determine the mode adapted to the creature. Hence, this term cause seems to mean diversity of substance and dependence of one from another. See, that's now the language he's using, which is not implied in the word principle. For in all kinds of causes, there is also to be found between the cause and the effect a distance of perfection or of power, whereas we use the term principle even in things which have no such difference, but have only a certain order to each other, as when we say that a point is the principle of a line, or also when we say that the first part of a line is the principle of a line. So he seems to have a problem with using the term cause as opposed to principle, and three of the reasons why is he thinks that cause actually implies a difference in substance, and the second is that he thinks that it implies dependency, which you would agree. And then the third is that he thinks there's a distance of perfection from the cause and the effect. So my question is, what is he? Obviously, it seems like you don't know, which is fine, because I know you're not an expert on Aquinas, and I'm not either. So I'm genuinely asking, because if principle isn't understood in terms of some type of causation or dependency relation, then how is it being utilized? How does it cash out in the metaphysics of Aquinas' system? You know what I mean? Because he's denying any type of dependency because he says that's his concern for using the word cause. But then what is the relationship? That's what I don't really understand.
This is from someone who's an amateur when it comes to mystic sort of metaphysics, but I'm trying to think that the way he would see it is because maybe there is not a numerical distinction between the persons, so he'll only hold to some sort of qualitative or relational distinction between them. So I think using the term cause assumes that there is a numerical distinction between whatever is the relator of that, so the input and the output of that causation relation. So I'm assuming what his understanding must be is because he doesn't see them as being numerically distinct, given divine simplicity. I think for him, principle allows him to have some form of distinction without it entailing a numerical distinction. That's what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. But I would need to go and read more. There's a very good book. What's his name? I think it's Gilbert or Guillory Emery or something like that, which is the Trinitarian theology of Thomas Aquinas. Yeah. I would point you towards that. So it's published by OUP, so Oxford University Press. Yeah. I think it's Emery, and it's a Trinitarian theology of Thomas Aquinas. So I think that he'll probably tackle that there. But yeah, generally I don't really, with Aquinas, like I was saying to you, I take a lot from him. He's a doctor of the church. I'm Catholic, so I respect him and I take a lot of what he's saying. But I think when it comes to Trinitarian theology, he didn't add much above that of the patristics, so the Cappadocians, or if you're taking some parts of Augustine.
Mm-hmm. Because he seems to be, he's appealing to the Latin fathers and saying, and I don't know if it's true or not, but he's basically saying this is how they conceive of it. He sees himself in that tradition, and to me, that's not my understanding of how even some of the early Latin fathers understood it. It seems clear to me that they did understand it in some type of dependency. And so that's why I struggle to really understand what he means by principle.
I think even there's good work by Louis Ayres on Augustine. And I think, like you were saying, he sort of sees Augustine as being very close to the Cappadocians and the Greeks. More than what's been assumed.
Although on the Filioque, it's
obviously, Filioque you'll have more problems. But I think there is quite a clear sort of pro-Nicene trajectory,
I agree.
Similarity in understanding of what the Trinity is.
I agree.
And then later on, you have this sort of divide that comes in and more overemphasis of some elements of it. And things like that. I'm interested to ask as well. So, we always had back and forth on the Trinity, Monarchy of the Father stuff. So are there any specific issues that you have with that monarchical Trinitarian view in particular, or would you say for you you're more accepting of that understanding, not saying obviously affirming its veracity, but saying, if Trinitarianism is correct, that's more the correct view, or do you see issues with it? Or
Depends. You mean from like a historical angle or from
any angle really? So it could be philosophically, it could be historically that you have an issue. What sort of?
I
issue
mean,
you might have?
no, I think it's historically grounded.
Yeah.
I think that it's very clear in 4th and 5th century church fathers, definitely like the Cappadocian fathers, even people like St. Augustine and others. So I think it's clearly there historically. My problem with it obviously is the dependency thing, which is one, which we've talked about a lot. But the other concern is, and I actually did a video on this where I played clips from one of your interviews with Dale Tuggy.
Okay.
And the issue that I see is that I don't think the monarchy of the Father position really solves the problem of tritheism.
Okay.
Because in the end, you do say several times within that interview, unless maybe it was off the cuff and you didn't mean it, but the way you presented it was as such, that in a certain sense there just are 3 gods. So I don't know if you would agree with that or not, because you even went into the whole thing with what's his name, Balcom, and explaining the difference between what was the phrase again, the different types of monotheism, quantitative and qualitative monotheism. In which case, it seems to me, quantitatively you're saying there's 3 gods, but qualitatively there's one, and depending on how you cash it out, because of some type of relation or whatever. So to me that's problematic, because it really hasn't, in other words, what sort of work is the monarchy doing if at the end it's still quantitatively polytheism? You see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the main thing for me is just how getting our language corresponding to the metaphysics. And the metaphysics of the matter is saying there is one fundamental entity in all of reality. The structure of reality, that layered structure of reality, there's one thing that's existing at the bottom level. The most fundamental entity, the absolute fundamental entity, I will identify as the Father. So everything above that level, everything above the level of the Father is a derivative entity, including that of the Son and the Spirit. And so the semantics of the matter, the language use of the matter is, we use the word God in that hotheos sense, the God, the thing, okay? We refer that term to whatever is at that fundamental structure of reality. And so I'm saying to you, as someone who affirms the monarchy of the Father, is saying the monarchy of the Father cashes that out, because it's saying, well, the one thing is the Father and the Father alone. A sort of, let's say, Bo's use of the word egalitarian, or the conventional understanding of the Trinity would say, no, we put all 3 persons in that fundamental structure. And I think that's when you have the problem. But what I'm saying is that there's only one particular object, one particular substance, which is at that bottom level, which is the Father alone. And that's the same type of monotheism I think all the other monotheistic religions affirm. Obviously, Islam wouldn't use the term maybe person for Allah, that you wouldn't use maybe that terminology, but you would say, if we're counting how many entities there are at that fundamental structure, well, there's only one entity. I think Jews will affirm the same thing. And I'm trying to say to you, Christians affirm that same thing as well. Everything above the Father is derivative. Yet, derivative status and fundamentality is nothing to do with the nature of these individuals. It's the way in which they exist. And so the Father,
unlike what Aquinas seemed to suggest.
So I mean, I'm happy to diverge on Aquinas on this point.
And again, that's just a quote. To be fair, I could be misreading them, but that's in a straightforward sense. That's how it seems.
I mean, I'm happy to diverge on.
Aquinas. No, it's fine.
So it's just saying that. What I was trying to say to you is the way in which they exist. The Father has a way of existing, which is that of being fundamental. And the Son and the Spirit have a derivative status. Yet they share the same nature in that they exemplify whatever it is to be divine. And so, and that's nothing to do with fundamentality. And so, what I'm trying to say to you is that the usage of, when we're counting gods, we need to know what we mean by the term God. And I would say the use of the word God is normally reference to the fundamental divine person. Or divine thing, if you don't want to use the term person. And so the fundamental divine entity within this Trinitarian framework is one thing, the Father. So we are only counting one God, even though you might say we're counting 3 divine persons. And so I'm trying to push this idea that there's a distinction between Trinitarian, Unitarian, monotheism, polytheism. monotheism is to do with fundamentality. How many fundamental divine persons?
Yeah.
I would say monotheism in Trinitarianism is, well, there's one fundamental divine person, the Father alone.
Yeah.
And so Muslims and Christians can share and high five on this matter. There's only one divine person, if you use the term person as well, the Father and Allah in your worldview. Yeah. Yet we are Trinitarian because we believe that there is more than one divine entity, which we include the Son and the Spirit. Yet you're Unitarian because you only believe there is only one divine entity as well. And so I don't think the even though I might have used the term God, I think I tried my best in that. Maybe it might not have been that interview, or might be the ones after it, where I brought in that distinction between, the way that we use the word God. Well, I'm happy to say there are three gods. If you're using that term in a synonymous way with divine or divinity, there are three divine persons. I don't think there's any problem with that. Yet there's only one God in the true sense of the word, because there's only one fundamental thing. So.
But then, in that case, and not without noticing, you're purposely equivocating on the word God. Because there's one God in the sense that there's one fundamental divine person, which is the Father alone. But then, in another sense of the word God, there are three gods in the sense that there are three divine persons. Because typically in English, at least when we're talking about God, to be divine simply is just to have all the properties and qualities that are necessary and sufficient to be God. And so if you have three individuals, each one that have that, then it seems like you have three gods. So again, that's not then to say that we back project that and say there are three fundamental entities. No, there's still one fundamental entity. So there's one God in one sense, but there's three gods in another sense, which me as a Muslim, as well as other Muslims, would have a concern with that, because you still have three entities which are divine, and there's a certain sense in which you can say, well, quantitatively, it's not monotheistic. Now, if you're referring to only fundamentality, then there's only one of them. But so that's still, to me, is still the concern, because I guess I don't see a significant difference between admitting three fundamental entities and having one fundamental entity, the other two are not fundamental, but also are considered God. That's kind of my worry, is that I don't really see, even coming from a Trinitarian perspective, what would be the necessity of the monarchy of the Father in that sense, because you're still in reality affirming something that the egalitarians would want to. You just think that you add this fundamental quality that the Father alone has. I don't think that it really does enough work to solve what really would be at issue for Muslims.
It might not be sufficient for Muslims, but I think when we're looking about the language use of the term God, I think it's a referential term which is not just fulfilled by something being divine. I think if you look throughout Scripture, or you look throughout church history, it wasn't just that this entity is divine that makes it the one God.
I agree. It was much more fluid.
I would say, because if you look at the Old Testament, you look at the New Testament, you look then into, let's say, the first 3 to 4 centuries. Divinity wasn't the issue. It literally wasn't. I mean, because as Borkham, as Larry Hurtado, as other individuals who have looked at Second Temple Judaism, there were loads of individuals that accepted other divine entities. And so it's and Larry Hurtado's really pushed this idea that we need to be so clear that within ancient Jewish monotheism, the issue wasn't about divinity, because the Jews accepted many divine entities within their worldview, but that didn't stop them from affirming monotheism. Their understanding of monotheism was that we worship one God, and the reason why we worship one God is because he is the sole creator of all reality, and he is not created by anything else. And so why we don't worship any idol or anything like that is because we weren't created by him, and that thing has created itself. And so the issue then is about fundamentality. The Jewish practice and the belief throughout ecclesiastical history was why we look to the Father and the Father alone, and Jesus himself pointing to and saying this is the one true God, is because of the fundamental aspect that he is the ultimate source of all of reality. And even natural theology points to that. Natural theology doesn't lead us to just a divine entity. Natural theology leads us to a divine entity who is the fundamental thing.
Yeah, we agree on that.
So what I'm saying to you is that not just natural, so you have natural theology, you have scriptural usage, you have ecclesiastical history, where it's actually the term God, the one that's most important, isn't its usage to say that something's divine. It is this entity divine and fundamental? If it is divine and fundamental, then it is the one that we give sole worship to. Because even as a Trinitarian, we worship the Father. Even though we worship Christ who is the medium between us and the Father. And so ultimately everything goes to the Father because he's the ultimate source of all of reality. And so what I'm trying to say to you is that the monarchy of the Father allows us to ground that understanding that actually the important usage of the word God when it comes to monotheism and polytheism is how many fundamental entities are there within your worldview. If you affirm more than one, then you are polytheistic. If you affirm one, then you are monotheistic. Yet you might not be a Unitarian. So a Unitarian is one who then affirms only one divine entity. So I think that distinction between monotheism, Unitarianism, polytheism, and Trinitarianism needs to be made there. And that's what I'm trying to say to you, the monarchy of the Father allows us to have.
I just think that from an Islamic paradigm, maybe we could say that the understanding of monotheism is stricter because the way that the Quran defines shirk, which is basically associating partners with God, is not necessarily to say that there's an entity which you're saying is the fundamental layer of reality like the Father. In fact, it quite frequently uses the term God to refer to things that even the individual themselves does not consider to be the fundamental layer of reality. For example, in the Quran, I think it's in chapter 45, verse 23, it mentions quite specifically, have you not seen those who worship their own desires as a god besides Allah? And then says that this is essentially shirk. In the following verse, it tells you what those people say. They say that there's nothing but this worldly life. We live and we die and nothing destroys us but time. Well, what does that sound like? Modern atheism. And so what the Quran is saying, even if you don't say that this being is the fundamental layer of reality or even use the word God in a lesser sense, not even to refer to the fundamental reality, is still problematic because you're attributing things that in the Islamic paradigm are due to God alone to other entities that are not fundamental, whether it be your own desires, whether it be Jesus from our perspective, obviously, whether it be Mary because of certain things that we think are too extravagantly applied to her, etc., etc. So the Quran also has a looser meaning of the term God, but in a different sense. It has a wider approach to say that no, strict monotheism is this. It's not only fundamental, but any type of quality, for example, omniscience. If you want to attribute omniscience to another being like the Son or the Holy Spirit, even if you say that they're not fundamental, it's still problematic. So that's why I said, in what aspect did you want to address the question? Because from an Islamic paradigm, theologically speaking, it's still problematic to say that you have these two other things that are divine, even if they're not fundamental, because the Quran sees it as you giving things qualities or attributes that are ascribed to God alone in the fundamental sense to these other beings. Even if it's not fundamentality, could be omniscience, could be omnipotence, whatever, and that itself Quran deems as problematic. You know, so I'm just saying, I'm not using it as an argument, but I'm saying as
my only
issue.
thing is that with Christianity and with Islam, something that we need to uphold, and I think we fully uphold in our worldviews, is that there is a continuity with what came before Christianity and Islam. Obviously, Islam would say it's been here since the beginning, but let's just, for the sake of the argument, say it came around, the 6th century. And so you have Islam, you have Christianity. What is always upheld in both of these worldviews is continuity with Judaism. And so what happens a lot of the time when I do speak to Muslims is that Christians have walked away from the monotheism of the past. Let's say you find it within the Jewish paradigm. And what I'm trying to say to you is that maybe there was a more tightening of the understanding of monotheism when it came to the Islamic worldview. But what I'm trying to say to you is that there is a continuity between Christianity and Judaism. And so even if there is a divergence when it comes to Christianity and Islam, that is not problematic. There will be a problem if you were to point to me and say, well, Jews understood monotheism in this specific sense, and not just obviously saying ancient Judaism, but let's even say Second Temple Judaism, so the time of Jesus, the immediate followers of Jesus understood monotheism in this specific sense. And Christians have moved away, then that will be a problem. But what I'm trying to say to you is that there's a continuity between Judaism and Christianity in affirming monotheism. And so maybe there's a difference when it comes to Islam, but then Islam has a problem then, if that's the case, because continuity of belief needs to be there. If you are saying that this religion has been here since the beginning, and it's the religion that we find in Judaism, maybe corruption came in, but it's the same nucleus there, it's the same religion that is then explicated fullest at the time of Prophet Muhammad, then you must have continuity and connectedness of belief. Yeah. But if there's a breaking of that, and I'm saying there's a breaking of that when it comes to monotheism, then there's a problem there in claiming continuity and connectedness of belief. Christians don't have that because we're trying to say actually in Second Temple Judaism, this is the understanding of monotheism that Christians have upholded all the way up to Nicaea.
Yeah, but what about before that? Do you think that the Jews always believed that, and can that be demonstrated historically?
Yes.
I don't think that.
Well, I would say to you.
Would you make that strong of a claim?
Oh, wait, are you saying Trinitarianism itself?
No. I'm saying
the understanding of monotheism.
The understanding of monotheism in the sense that it's problematic to associate things with God, not just in the nominal sense of using the word God, because we see that in the Old Testament with Moses, for example, is made a god to Pharaoh, Elohim, and things like that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, in the sense that there were Jews that believed in the monarchy of the Father and that didn't believe in the existence of the Son and the Spirit, and would use the term God loosely and fluidly to refer to other beings, but never understood that those other beings were equal to the Father.
Okay, so obviously prior to the time of Christ, there wasn't that maybe clear explicated understanding of there being two other divine persons. But what I'm trying to say to you is that for the whole point of what I'm trying to explain is that monotheism wasn't to do with divinity. That's what I'm really trying to emphasize here. And so if there was more than one
but was
divine,
that universally held by the Jews?
I would say it's been quite clearly shown by quite a few scholars. I think a clear one is Michael Hyde. He is a Christian, but he's done phenomenal work on the Old Testament and the understanding of monotheism in the Old Testament. And so sort of this idea of the divine council.
I'm familiar with all that material, but I'm saying, is there descending or opinions that are scholarly that disagree with those theories, in the sense that that's not, although that may have been held by some Jews, doesn't mean that it was universal.
Oh yes, of course. I mean, in any field, you could always find scholars disagreeing on stuff. But you go with what's the majority, and also who's the most reputable in the field, who people are then being most influenced by in their sort of scholarly work. And I think a lot of people would look to individuals who have been tackling this issue. So, for example, Larry Hurtado, I think he's played a massive role in sort of ancient Jewish monotheism, understanding what that is. And he has shown clearly in his work that, and even Richard Borkham itself, even though he's a Christian, I think a lot of scholars looked at his work as being very, very influential. Even Hurtado himself pointed to Borkham prior to his death.
I'm not saying all this stuff is nonsense.
So I'm saying to you that obviously you'll have diversion of opinion in any field, but a number of reputable scholars would say actually monotheism, correctly understood, was to do with worship practice, and the idea that actually we worship the one God, the Father, and we don't worship any other deity, we don't sacrifice to any other deity, and that's what grounded monotheism. Yet belief in more than one deity wasn't a problem. So Hurtado really is emphasizing that idea. He even says we shouldn't, well, not him actually, sorry, other scholars have said we shouldn't use the word monotheism anymore. because it's just not helpful. Because monotheism now has come to the idea that there is a belief in one God, belief in one deity. But actually ancient Jewish monotheism, which Hurtado is really emphasizing, is worship practice. We worship and sacrifice to the one God alone, and that's what makes us monotheistic. Even though we might believe in a plurality of other divine entities within our worldview, that doesn't stop us from being monotheistic. And so what I'm trying to say to you is that there is an emphasis here that there is a categorical distinction between the one God, who we would call the Father, and there being other divine entities. And so what I'm trying to say to you is, with contemporary speech taken from metaphysics, fundamentality is that categorical distinction. He is the fundamental entity because he's unsourced and is the source of all reality. Yet there can be other divine entities that share his qualities, yet they're non-fundamental because they are grounded or come from him in some specific sense of that word.
So let me be clear. The Muslim position would be, even if we couldn't find a single trace of evidence of the Islamic conception, we would still believe in it. So the historical account for us, although we'll look at what the evidence is, lack of evidence, even if I granted it for the sake of argument, which I'm not, let's say there's absolutely no evidence, Muslims would still believe in it because we believe that our faith is justified by other prior considerations, by the Quran itself, by the prophethood of Muhammad, etc. And so because of that, even if we couldn't, let's say for sake of argument, we could not find within the Jewish tradition any semblance of the Islamic conception of God, in that you didn't have these other lesser divine beings who were accepted, and it was sort of this not strict monotheistic religion in the way that Muslims conceive of it, still wouldn't be a problem for us in that way. Now, you may look at that as problematic, and maybe some other people would as well. But for me personally, and I don't think Muslims in general either would disagree with this, that our position on this does not rest on a historical analysis of what is going on in contemporary scholarship based on this. See what I'm saying? Yeah.
That's on Larry Hurtado's point.
I know who he is. Yeah.
He's dead now.
He what?
He passed away maybe 2 years ago. So.
Yeah, but he doesn't state. He says there were multiplicity of gods that were believed, but they were never equivocated to being the one divine Almighty God.
Well, that's his position.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what he's saying.
But you're a monarchical.
But I mean that's what I was affirming.
So what I'm saying is, it's not an argument. I'm just trying to get you to understand from our point of view that for us it doesn't really matter, because there are many things that we can't establish historically, but we believe in them based on prior conditions that we have good reason to believe that the religion is true. And there are things like that in Christianity or Judaism as well. Now, basically the question is, well, should we actually find that information? Well, I see numerous examples in the Quran, and this has always been the Quranic narrative, is that people go astray very easily. For example, we have the example of Moses and Aaron in the Quran, in which the Quran addresses them as two messengers who existed and were brothers at the same time. And the Jews actually started worshiping a golden calf while they were around. Moses left for a brief period and they started worshiping the golden calf when Aaron was alone, and Moses came back and he was so annoyed at what happened in a short amount of time. So for us, it's conceivable, and it's not at all out of the realm of possibility that simply that narrative was there and that belief was there, and that people have gone astray. And this is the Islamic position. So for me, and I think Muslims in general, I don't think that they're going to be bothered too much by this historical analysis of what the Jews supposedly believed.
But I would say I do believe that there's a problem that needs to be wrestled with, even though, I mean, Muslims might not see it as problematic. There is a problem there that I think should be taken into account. And it's basically the idea that there's a positive claim made by Muslims that there is a continuity of belief in Islam. So Islam is not just a new religion that just showed up when Prophet Muhammad was around.
Yeah.
But it's always been there. Maybe there was corruption and problems, but it's always been there from the beginning.
Yeah.
It was expressed in Judaism. There was corruption, but it was expressed.
Yeah.
It was expressed in the religion of Jesus. But there was maybe corruption and it became Christianity and blah, blah, blah. But it's always been there. But then if there's a positive claim made, then there should be evidence in favor of that positive claim. Because
Well, not necessarily. That's what I'm disputing.
yeah. But what I'm trying to say to you is that there's a good way to sort of think about this idea is that, and I used the terms before, but if we hold to a body, an organization being, an organization that's been there from the beginning, then at each point of its existence, there should be continuity and connectedness between that present body and the previous bodies. Yeah. So, for example, if I have a company that I start up and I say, hey guys, I'm called McDonald's. But then I'm selling some sneakers. I'm selling American. I'm selling some trainers and I'm selling clothing. But I call myself McDonald's. And I've never even worked at McDonald's, I've just started McDonald's. Are you going to call me McDonald's that we've known and we've always been brought up with, that we've eaten from? You're not going to call me the same company. The reason being is because there's not connectedness in practice and continuity in practice, and also in organization, because I was never involved. But let's say the CEO of McDonald's, the guy in charge, said, you know what, we're going to actually diversify our business because we need a little bit of money, so we're going to start off a clothing company now. We're still called McDonald's, but we're going to also have a bit of in our restaurant where you can go and buy some clothing. And let's say, I send off a manager to start that up. Is that McDonald's that I'm going to where they're selling clothing going to be the same McDonald's? It would be. The reason being is because there's continuity, because you're still maybe selling some burgers whilst you're selling some clothing, but there's also continuity in organization because the CEO was the person who started that. Now, the whole point of saying all of this example was Islam is claiming to be a body that has connected, that is not something that just came about, but has always been there. So then with the previous bodies, there should be continuity and connectedness between them. Now, what I'm trying to say to you is, with the central belief in Islam, which is the belief in God, and monotheism, and the central belief in Judaism, which is the belief in God, and monotheism, as we see in the Shema, and even in Christianity, the central belief is in monotheism, as Jesus said, we should affirm that there's only one God. So monotheism is a key belief. Now, what I'm trying to say to you is, if there is a discontinuity between Islamic monotheism and Judaic monotheism, then you cannot claim continuity and connectedness between the body, whatever it is Judaism is, and Islam. You have to call Islam a new religion. You cannot claim it to be a religion that's always been there, because there is a discontinuity.
But the point is, you're claiming there's a discontinuity based on lack of evidence or lack of historical evidence to support the claim. And my point is that just because they're supposed, which I'm not even granting, because honestly I have to research it much more in depth. But let's say for the sake of argument there's just no evidence whatsoever. Well, there's many things that even Christians believe in that there's absolutely no historical evidence for whatsoever. So I, as a Muslim, don't have to prove every link in the chain that goes from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, all the way back to Prophet Adam and show that there is a historical link at every point in the chain. I don't think that I need to do that. Now you're saying, well, maybe that's true. I don't know if you're going to disagree, but specifically on the point of monotheism, you're saying, well, maybe it's a stronger necessity that we need to somehow find that evidence. I don't see it that way.
But what I'm trying to say to you is that I would agree with you. I'm not saying there has to be evidence for every link in the chain. But what I'm saying to you is that there is positive evidence, which again, you said you want to go and look at, and I think it's, don't just take my word for it, but there's positive evidence that monotheism was a little bit looser than
I agree with that.
Than what Islam is saying.
I agree with that, but there's also claims that monotheism has sprung out of polytheism. I mean, that's the standard narrative. Do you accept that?
I mean, I'm leaning a lot on Hurtado. But people like Hurtado would say that narrative is incorrect. So it's a narrative.
I know, but I'm saying that's pretty mainstream.
I mean, it's a narrative that was pushed, and some people have looked at it. Might be James McGrath, who's also defended it. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's a narrative, but again, I think some scholars have shown that there isn't good reason to believe that. But that aside, anyway, I do.
I'm just saying it's a historical issue because if we're taking this scholarship seriously, then that also would be a problem for both Judaism and Christianity, because the narrative is that monotheism was born out of polytheism, and that's been the standard narrative for quite some time. I agree that, as you said, there's always going to be people that push back on it, and just like that, I would push back on that as well. But in the same token, if I found absolutely no evidence of that claim, I still would be a Muslim. So that's my point.
But my only thing is that, I'm not saying about you, but consistency in analysis should be, if we're going to utilize the framework of history to understand which religion is the
I don't primarily do that.
I'm not saying maybe you do, so I'm not trying to straw man your position and say this is what you're doing. But I'm saying generally what I understand is that the only way to literally, because I don't think, and I really do believe, I don't think there's any logical incoherence in the understanding of the Trinity within the monarchical picture. So, because someone could say, well, there is a philosophical problem, that's why we're led to Islam and we don't go to Christianity, because there's a logical incoherence. I don't believe there's a logical incoherence there that can be derived in the monarchical view. I do believe in some egalitarian views there is a logical contradiction, but I don't believe that's to be had with the equivocation strategy that's given by...
So if a Trinitarian believed in three fundamental entities, would you say that was incoherent?
No, not necessarily. It'll be incoherent if applying that to the Trinity would be.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Why that will be so is, well, it depends actually how you cash out fundamentality. But let's say you go with fundamentality is relative to grounding, and you say that each of the Son and the Spirit are grounded by the Father, but yet they're fundamental, then that'll be a problem, because to be fundamental is to be ungrounded. And so you'll say there's three ungrounded and two grounded entities, which is...
What if they're all ungrounded?
Then you can't hold to the procession relations unless you identify that differently. So unless you say there is a causation relation and they're relative to fundamentality relative to grounding, they're ungrounded.
I'm saying if they reject the procession relations and say there are three fundamental entities within the Trinity,
that's not incoherent.
What?
No, that's not incoherent.
Yeah. So, but then at the same time say that there's only one God. Well, if you're saying that God is understood in terms of fundamental, and there's three that are fundamental,
I agree with you. That'll be a problem. That'll be a problem. If you're using the term God to refer to the idea that there is only one fundamental entity, yet you affirm three fundamental entities, then that will be an incoherence. But I would say the monarchical picture doesn't say that.
I know that. I'm just saying.
So I'm saying the whole point of what I was saying was I don't believe philosophy can lead you to Islam over Christianity and
obviously I disagree.
You'll disagree, but just from my position, I believe it's the historical work that you have to do to be able to diversify. Okay, I mean,
I disagree with
unless
that.
you can bring specific ones that you.
So actually, I want to talk about something because let me check the time. I've only got maybe 10 more minutes.
No, that's fine.
I actually have to go teach a class.
That's fine.
So,
it's good being able to speak.
Yeah, maybe about 20 more minutes. I can push it. So. There's two other, because I'm not trying to run from this conversation, but I think we've kind of exhausted that point. I want to get to one or two other things. So the other thing is that on this philosophical point, do you think that the Trinity can be arrived at or established by philosophical argumentation in a way that you say that the Trinity is necessary, that we must rationally accept the Trinity itself? I know that you've kind of argued for that, but what I wanted to ask you because as a Catholic, I think it's problematic because to me, the Catholic Church seems to say that the Trinity itself is a mystery in the sense that, and I'm happy to be corrected, but I've had many Catholics actually tell me this, that we can't actually argue for the necessity of the Trinity based on philosophy or reason alone, because it's actually a dogma of the Church to say that the Trinity is a mystery. And when I use the term mystery, I mean it in the biblical sense and how the Church understands it, in the sense that it's a doctrine which was formerly unknown, which was later came to be known. It's something that is revealed. It's a revealed doctrine that is not known through reason alone.
Yeah.
And in fact, I know you disagreed with Aquinas earlier, and that's fine, but Aquinas actually quite strongly says not only can the Trinity not be established by reason alone, but anyone who thinks that they can is actually degrading the faith and going against the faith. He makes pretty strong claims about it. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So I agree that it can't be by reason alone. But in one of my articles so where I try and formulate a new love argument that I believe isn't subject to this problem and other problems that are being raised by against Swinburne's one. I believe that the Trinity can be derived from, it can come from reason and revelation. So the problem is, I don't believe it can come from reason alone, but it can come from revelation and then from something being revealed
to back it up.
No. So in the it's a long and boring paper, so I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty. But I in that paper, I'm arguing that the idea of love, that there is a certain form of love that's revealed in Scripture, and I am open to even say other religions will affirm this to be revealed, that there is love is revealed, or a certain type of love is agapeic love. So agapeic love is a love that is revealed in Scripture, and so from God revealing agapeic love, we can then derive the Trinity from that conception of love. And so the idea here is that because Swinburne basically takes a view that from our conception of love that we've understood within our human context, we then can derive the Trinity. What I'm trying to say is from the conception of love that's revealed to us from Holy Scripture, we can then derive the Trinity. And so Revelation is part of that. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a certain type of love that's fixed in the Bible, and that certain type of love then allows us to then derive the other two persons from the Father. So it's not just a solely a priori exercise, which I would say the Catholic Church would say you can't do. You can't just say, from sitting on my couch on a Sunday morning, I can come to the Trinity just thinking about the idea of love. Because that's what Swinburne's argument is sort of trying to say. What I'm trying to say is, from a certain type of love that's been revealed, agapeic love, we can then derive the Trinity from that. And so it's from reason and revelation, not just reason alone.
But you need the revelation to come first, right?
Oh, yes, 100%.
Okay, so, and then on that point, so I agree that Scripture presents it that way as far as how God's love is, and I haven't read the paper, but I think I get the gist of what you're saying. But I'm wondering what your position is on what's called the doctrine of no real relations, that God is not really related to the world. What's your position on that? Because it seems to me the classical position actually negates the concept of love that you're talking about, because God doesn't actually really love us in the way that we perceive love. Love, what Aquinas says, love is simply just to will the good of another. And it doesn't seem like that's the case to me, because there's no intentional act, there's no directedness at the individual in which you are loving that individual. And if that is how it's being framed as part of the agape love argument, then it contradicts that doctrine. Not only that, it seems to me that it actually undermines St. Augustine's understanding of the Trinity. Why do I say that? Because his analogy to the Trinity is a human being, and analogizes it to God, actually loving himself rather than loving another. And so that's another issue. And then leading on from that, I'm not trying to pile on too much, but Dale Tuggy, as I'm sure you know, makes a distinction between one-self and three-self Trinitarian views. It seems to me that this type of argument assumes a three-self Trinitarian view, such that it not only says that Unitarianism is not a viable option, or I don't know how far you want to push it, whether it's a plausibility argument or it's meant to say that it's completely incoherent. I think it also would do this, whatever that argument is meant to conclude with, would do the exact same thing for any one-self Trinitarian models, such as Augustine and Aquinas, etc.
Not to throw, sorry, I'm going to be the paper guy, throwing too many papers at you. But there is just starting with your first point about the real relations issue. There's a paper that was in the same journal as that love argument called the Metaphysics of Theism, where I try and reconcile how someone can affirm a classical view of God and a neoclassical view of God without contradiction.
I saw you had a video on that. I was watching some of it, but I didn't get to watch the whole thing.
So anyway, so the whole point of doing all of that is because relative to whatever, the classical view of God, you can hold to God not being really related to us in that specific way of being, way of existence. Yet you can still affirm God being really related to us through his neoclassical way of being. Now,
that's going to take a lot of time to unpack. So,
So I don't want to go into that. So that's what I'm saying about papers. But I would refer, yourself or anyone else who's interested in that. I think there is ways to affirm God not being really related, but still having that.
So if someone didn't have that other aspect and just affirmed what seems to be the purely classical view, then would that be problematic?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I'm open to that but I don't think I'm not saying that the metaphysics, someone has to absorb the metaphysics I'm trying to push to reconcile these two positions. But I think...
No. What I'm saying is I think the argument assumes that type of metaphysics, such that if you don't accept that, the arguments won't work.
So I'm saying that I would say that I'm open to other ways of people reconciling it, but I would say unless there's reason to go against the metaphysical sort of view that I'm putting to make sense of how you can reconcile these two things, then I don't see the problem. But yes, I think maybe a classical theistic view of God without any way of having a neoclassical understanding might have this problem. Yes, I would agree.
I'm not saying from an outsider perspective. I'm saying within the Trinitarian camp, I think that many people would have a problem with that because they wouldn't want to affirm the distinction you're making, and I don't want to get into it, but the whole abstract concrete thing, and I think that they would have a problem with it. And I can't prove it, but it just seems on a straightforward basis. I don't think that the church fathers thought of it in that way. I think they thought of it in this classical way, and they were against the neoclassical picture. Now, I know that you're trying to synthesize them, but I'm saying, back to an earlier point, if we're trying to take the history, and especially as a Catholic, trying to take the history and tradition of the church seriously, I do see that as something that's novel, that is not in continuity with what the church fathers taught.
The something I tried to bring out in the paper in that interview as well was the methodology itself is not novel because it's just the qua methodology that you find with duplicative predication where, with Christ, acquires human nature, acquires divine nature, he has these attributes. I'm doing the exact same thing, but I'm just applying it within a different context. But I think also the metaphysics that I utilize, so ontological pluralism, which has been really forwarded by Chris McDaniel, he shows in his work that actually it's a historically grounded position that fell out of favor, and then he's sort of trying to bring it back into favor. So it is something that's there. I would agree with you. Application of it is novel, but that's not problematic. Because what I'm trying to do anyway, because the whole point of the paper was trying to say, I call them traditionalists, and I say someone who holds to the authority of Scripture and someone who holds to the authority of tradition has a bit of a contradiction. Because Scripture says God is neoclassical, and tradition says he is classical. What are we supposed to do? So I'm saying you have a problem there. But what will normally happen is that someone would say, well, actually, Scripture doesn't say, is not a neoclassical understanding. And blah, blah, blah.
Or they'll say that it appears that way, but it's written in such a way for you to understand it that way, but God is not actually that way. So what I'm saying is, I think that many classical theists, specifically in the Catholic tradition, would have an issue with your presentation of it. Now, that I'm not saying that means that it's false. That's not what I'm arguing. But I'm saying, per impossibility, if we were able to resurrect Aquinas or even Augustine and have them here, I don't think that they would be accepting of it, even though you say, well, look, guys, I'm using the qua move and I'm just applying it in a different sense, they would say, "Sorry, Josh, you're misapplying it."
Yeah. But I know, not to
to
argue with the dead Aquinas, but I think Aquinas would take the methodology of let's look at its veracity. If there's problems with it, then don't go with it.
Yeah.
But just because the application might be new, doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem. Specifically as a Catholic, because the understanding of Catholicism is that tradition is alive. So it's not like, so maybe an Eastern Orthodox might have more of a problem because there is a great, sort of emphasis on the first millennium. That's when everything sort of shut down, and after that we don't have any more councils and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So if it's not in the first millennium, no. But Catholics might not. They would say we prioritize the first millennium, but necessarily doesn't mean that you cannot have developments in place later on. And so maybe this development of methodology or application of methodology is something that needs to be had, because what I'm trying to say is at face value, we can take scripture at face value. Mm-hmm. We can take tradition at face value. With our latest metaphysics, we can do this sort of reconciliation. Mm-hmm. Okay, not to to move off this point and go to something you were saying about the three self and one self.
And St. Augustine's understanding of the analogy he gives is God loving himself, not God loving another.
Okay, now, interestingly, the actual argument that I give in that paper is not predicated on a one self or three self. It can actually be applied in a one self context because it utilizes the idea of duplication. So it's the idea that the Father is in a relation with a duplicate of him, and the Father and the Son are in a relationship with a duplicate of each other. Now, this duplication, it could be that there is a numerical distinction between them or not. So you could affirm a numerical distinction and say the duplicate is numerically distinct but qualitatively identical. Or
but then you're going to have to do something with classical identity in that aspect.
Yeah, no. Again, not paper bashing, but there's one paper which is going to be interesting, and I'll like to, when it ever does come out, if it ever does come out, but it's been under review for like forever. But there's a paper where I actually flip the script and I try and argue from a one-self view and try to show how the logical problem of the Trinity, you can have a one-self view and affirm all the things that the tenets of the logical problem normally bring without falling into contradiction. And I actually say the Father, Son, and the Spirit are numerically identical.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to have a one-self view, especially based on the biblical portrayal of the relationship between the Father and the Son. Yeah. And not only that, the problem of indexicals, which I've brought up to Bo in the past, and I don't know if you followed the ongoing argument between Scott Williams and William Hasker. I think Hasker has made significant and very strong points, and it's actually something I discuss in my course where I go through that. So, I mean, most people probably have no idea what we're talking about, but
I think everyone's left.
Yeah, everybody left.
Everyone's like, well, what's good on here?
Yeah. So, but my point is, I think there are very strong arguments against a one-self view, and so because of that, I don't really see it as a viable option.
I mean, I affirm a free self view personally, but what I was trying to show is that if we were to take a one self view, I don't believe there's a problem, and that's what I'm trying to show them. But personally, I'll probably go with a three self view. I mean, the argument I'm giving from love, that specific one, I don't believe it's wedded to a three self view, even though Swinburne's is. Okay. So Swinburne's is wedded to a three self view. But the one I'm trying to push, I don't believe it is. It's sort of quiet on the matter.
And you have you put the paper out already on that?
Yeah. So,
if you can just send me that.
I will send it.
And then I do have to run.
Yeah, we can catch up more.
If I could squeeze in one last question. I'm just going to give him one last question, and I actually have to run. So this idea of God as a necessary being, right? Yeah. It seems to me that in your discussion with Mullins, and that you take sort of a Swinburnian view in which God isn't necessary, including the Father. That's the way that I understood it. Specifically on your whole analogy of the intrinsic properties of God and what you consider the great making properties, to me, all of those scenarios, like the example you gave of the lonely rock existing, right? It assumes that God isn't necessary because there's a possibility in which he doesn't exist, and all you have is the lonely rock, right? So just for clarity's sake, what is your position on that? And does part of your argument for trying to show that aseity cannot be an intrinsic property is inherent within that classification of those attributes, assume that God is not logically necessary?
No, just going with the second point first. I don't think it does, and I'm still, because I've had this issue with trying to understand Ryan's objection as well.
Yeah, but do you get what I'm trying to say?
I get what you're trying to say. But I'm trying to understand the objection, because the point is just the idea that if we take, an intrinsic property to be one that's not dependent upon our situation. So whatever object has a property, if that property is not dependent upon the situation, the external situation of that object, then it's an internal it's internal. An intrinsic property.
Intrinsic, yeah.
But if it is dependent in some way upon its situation, then it's extrinsic property.
Right, yeah.
And so what Lewis tries to do, so David Lewis tries to do with his lonely object thing, is trying to say, well, if a property can be had by a lonely object and can be had by an accompanied object, and if it can be lacked by a lonely object and lacked by an accompanying object, then it's an intrinsic property. So it's just trying to say the property itself, not the object, but can the property itself be had or lacked? And is it dependent upon its environment or not? If it can be had or lacked and it's not dependent upon its environment, then it's intrinsic. And so what I'm trying to say to you with the property of aseity, it is not like that, because it is dependent upon its environment. Because if an entity, so not God, but if an entity is ase, so that means it's not dependent upon anything else, and it's not caused by anything else, can it be had by an accompanying object? Yes. But can it be lacked by a lonely object? No. Because for it to be lacked, that means that it has to have a cause.
Yeah.
So, for it to have a cause, it has to be accompanied by something that causes it.
Yeah.
And so, but now, what I wanted to bring up as well is that with Ryan, there was also a misconception had with essential and intrinsic. So.
Yeah, I recognize that.
So
I'm not trying to make that point.
So with the intrinsic property, for example, of omnipotence is an intrinsic property. Yeah. Because an entity can have it can lack it, lonely or accompanied. But aseity is not like that, because it can't have it when it can't lack it, when it's unaccompanied, when it's lonely.
Yeah.
So there's a distinction to be had between those properties. So for me, it's nothing to do with God being necessary, him himself.
I think it is, though, because in order for that example to even work, that has to be a genuine possibility. Otherwise, you're just spouting meaningless words in a sense. So what I'm saying is, if God is logically necessary, and I'm not saying that you have to take that view, but if God is logically necessary, then that scenario in which God doesn't exist, because he doesn't exist in that situation, which you have a lonely rock that exists alone and is ase. It's only the rock, right? So if that is a genuine possibility, how could God be logically necessary? You should be able to derive a contradiction from that scenario.
I'm not. If it is entailing that God can't be logically necessary, I don't have a
meaning
problem.
in the sense of ontological argument, a strong ontological argument. If you're using a strong ontological argument to say that God is logically necessary, not merely metaphysically necessary, or even if you wanted to say something less than that and say he's contingent. So it seems to me that in order to use those examples, they assume that a lonely rock existing ase is a genuine possibility, because if it's not, then that's not a possible world, because God exists in every possible world, and therefore there could never be any other lonely object, including a rock or anything else.
No, I have no problem. If it is that there's an entailment that God is logically contingent, then that's not...
Or even if you wanted to say... if you want to say he's logically contingent, or I haven't thought about it, maybe you could say that he's metaphysically necessary. I would have to give that more thought. but I don't think you would be able to affirm that model and way of arguing while at the same time saying that strictly speaking, God is logically necessary, because it seems to be a contradiction between that. On the one hand, if God is logically necessary, then that other situation is impossible. It's logically impossible. And so therefore you can't use that as a means of getting the attribute of aseity being extrinsic off the ground.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, there's two ways. I want to think a little bit more deeper about it, but it could be that the argument itself is predicated on epistemic possibility, and epistemic possibility understood from the sort of Saul Kripke sense, that something's epistemically possible, and then you need an a posteriori investigation to understand if it's metaphysically possible or impossible.
Yeah.
So it could be that this is just saying it's an epistemic possibility. That's something I do want to think about deeper.
But then the question would be, is that enough to get it off the ground?
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. So something I'll think about a little bit deeper. But the second thing is, as well, is I still don't see the problem if it does entail that God is logically contingent.
No,
for me as
but
well.
there's a reason why I'm bringing it up, and I'll tell you why. Not to do with you specifically, but so yeah, I will actually say it and play a bit of my cards.
Yeah.
Have Dr. Branson's argument is based on a modal ontological argument for the necessity of the Son.
Okay.
Within his presentation, he's utilizing your part of what I just said, this discussion, as part of his argument for establishing that aseity is an extrinsic property. I'm saying that those two arguments directly contradict one another, because the argument for the necessity of the Son, he's using S5 and is predicated on logical necessity, not God being even metaphysically necessary, and definitely not logically contingent. And so therefore, to use that argument and that as supplementary or in line with it entails a contradiction. They're contradictory to one another.
No, I understand. Yeah, I'm very interested to see your dialogue with him. But personally myself, I don't really affirm.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
I understand. But I'm interested to see the dialogue. I am at the moment though thinking about something I'm thinking about a little bit more deeper. Is necessity so important?
Yeah.
When you take a fundamentality framework. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I'm trying to think more. I don't really have a problem if God is logically contingent.
Yeah.
So long as he's fundamental and the most fundamental entity that exists, then I don't see necessity as being absolutely important. But it's something I'm thinking about a little bit deeper. But I am very interested.
Well, you do like Swinburne, so yeah.
No, I mean, Swinburne's my guy. So whatever he says.
But then would you, in that sense, would you give all modal a status equally to the Father, Son, and Spirit, in the same sense that you would say that even though the Father is fundamental, each one of the persons are equally logically contingent?
Oh yes,
Okay, you would just if you went that route, you would just do it across the board.
I think I'll be like,
Okay.
But it's something I do need to think deeper. But I will look out for your dialogue with Bo and see how that
So
goes.
Bo sees this. I've played a bit of my cards, but I really do think that this is a very strong argument against his. At least internally, I think I can derive a contradiction from what he's expressed in the video. And to be quite honest, what I think happened, and I'll just say quite frankly, I think because you share a similar view in trying to assert that aseity is not a necessary property in order to be God, he took some of your material, which was novel, in trying to argue that and incorporated it into his view without realizing that it contradicts the very argument that he's using. So that's my position.
I haven't watched the video that he did, so I'll be interested to watch that as well.
Because he did slightly modify it from our original discussion, and he did say that he modified his argument due to his discussion with me, but I think in modifying it and adding certain things to it, such as your view, which I'm not saying yours is incoherent because you're happy to say, well, yeah, God could be logically contingent, in which case, at least internally, we could argue if that's problematic or not, but internally it would be consistent. I'm saying for his view, and specifically his view to try to prove the necessity of the Son is problematic. Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's the reason why I brought it up, because I wanted to see just what your thoughts were if I was making sense, because sometimes you think of an idea and you think it's you think it's smart, but then you find out it doesn't make much sense. So
Jake, I'll let you go to your
Yeah, I actually have to go.
Yeah, it was good
I actually have to go teach a class now, guys. So
Thank you.
it was
Thank
great.
Awesome.